how did the other countries feel? I know there was renegotiation of the 4+2 agreements and so on. Could you describe that?
So there was some people also reflecting resentments or in their own people. The French President Mitterrand, for instance, he was not too much in favor of reunification, but then he backed it because he was a friend of Helmut Kohl, and so there was a lot of conversation among them. Refer to Margaret Thatcher, she was not too much in favor also, but she accepted it. Then we had President Bush, senior. He was quite open for reunification and got a lot of. So he offered a lot of support for that. Of course, Gorbachev. There is some debate about his role he played, and he's a kind of hero in German eyes, but he's a kind of villain in Soviet eyes. In the end, on October the 3rd, 1990, reunification could take place.
How did Germany convince the external forces? I read that Margaret Thatcher was one of the opponents of German reunification at the time. Later, she took it back. She apologized for the mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first of all, without the consensus of the big, what so-called former Allied powers and forces, so the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and the United States, the unification would have not been possible. For the simple formal reason that Germany in the 1980s was still in the post-war state, which means that the question of a reunification of Germany was kept open in the negotiations at the end of the Second World War. So without the agreement of the Allied forces that in some parts of Germany were still occupying forces, in Berlin, for example, the reunification could not have happened. Now we have different situations. Some of the impulses for the reunifications came from the Soviet Union, and you know that Gorbachev was on a path towards liberalization, towards an opening. Gorbachev was also someone who very clearly saw that the GDR was bankrupt and that the economic situation was so terrible that the reunification should rather happen earlier than later. I actually spoke with members of the last GDR government who told me that they got phone calls from Moscow saying if they do not negotiate a reunification very soon, the Soviet state would not longer be able to give them credits and to finance the system, so that the GDR could no longer pay the state officials. So there was, from the Soviet side, first of all a political impulse, but then also a clear signal that the Soviet Union was no longer able to sustain the GDR as it has done for a long time. Then on the side of the other allies, especially France and Britain, there was of course a feeling of unease, because Germany had played historically a very dominant role in the middle of Europe, and the fears, French fears and British fears, would of course be that Germany reunited would, geostrategically and also economically become so strong that it would try to dominate Europe and maybe even beyond Europe. And these fears were making the politicians, Mitterrand, Thatcher, reluctant in the beginning. But then in the process we could see that both of these countries started to get in line with the situation, and then in the fall, parallel to the political unification, there are the famous 2+4 negotiations in which the two German states plus the former Allied powers signed an agreement which was the base for everything that could happen later.